Hello and welcome to another episode of Becoming the Brand. My name is Hedayat, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking with communication expert Paige Strand, with nearly 15 years of experience in communication across many different industries, including finance, tech, hotel, real estate, construction, just to name a few. Today we'll be talking about communications and how to tell your story to reach a wider audience. Paige, thank you so much for joining me today here on Becoming the Brand. Let me get a little bit more understanding of what you do, who you are, and how you got into this business of communication.
Definitely. And thank you again for having me. This is a great space. I've been in communications for, over a decade. I've been industry agnostic, so I've moved from everywhere between, as you mentioned, in publishing, automotive, tech, banking tech. Now I'm in investor relations. One thing that's amazing about comms and being able to tell stories is being able to work between so many different narratives and so many organizations, industry sectors. There's so much to tell and so little time. But I would say in terms of communications, I've had quite the journey, and I'm just, really excited to be in a spot right now, especially with so much technology at our fingertips. So, post-COVID, there's so much opportunity and so much different perspective now in terms of how we tell our stories. So
that's why I see a lot of times major companies or the CEOs or the executives get on camera and tell their story or tell their story behind their families and how they began and how they started. Mm-hmm. I think those stories of their beginnings resonate with the audience to a certain degree, and most of us are in some level maybe where they are or where we aspire to be, and it's like, I'm almost there. Let me see how this person's story evolves and how I can be a part of that journey as well, and how I can then apply this knowledge that he's shared and how he's grown his company. So when you said stories, I mean, are you focused on helping companies when you strategize with them?
Great question. I think it can really vary on the organization. I know in past I've been part of the execution. In some other organizations, I'm directly advising the C-level leaders and making sure that they're on track with strategy and vision, making sure we're all aligned, telling the right story. I think in other elements, it's also about, and something you just kind of touched on, is increasing that element of transparency in our stories. So, it's very easy for any company to be like, hey, this is where we started, this is where we're here, here's a company update, numbers, data, statistics. And a lot of that is important too, but it was something you just touched on that's incredibly important and has been in every organization I've served, is that element of transparency, that humanity element. Why does this matter? We can, at the end of the day, there's a lot of data right now, particularly around ESG, environmental, social governance principles, that speaks to, the perception of an organization that has strong return, performs well year over year, and then the organization over here that is performing well, but also speaks to that heightened transparency that people are looking for. Often the public perception of the latter is higher. Yeah. And so a lot of that actually plays into some of the storytelling elements, but also from the investor side as well. Yeah. People who are really looking for that transparency.
Absolutely. And like we touched on, it's the people behind the brand that really allows other individuals, whether they're investors or whether they're consumers wanting to buy or consume the product or service of a company, that's what engages them into it. Mm-hmm. When I know more about a company's owner or CEO or the founders of what struggles or challenges they had to go through in order for them to become what they are now, that to me is incredible. And that story is so powerful that it moves me. And it's like, oh, well, that's awesome. And even though I may never even had done business before with them, and if I'm considering this, it's like, you know what, this is a company that I would look into when I'm ready to buy, or ready to make that move forward, because I know their story. And you actually walk around. I don't know if you ever, hear a story or watch, behind the scenes of a film back in the days where you get the DVD, or you see things and you go around telling everybody, did you know that the director did this during this part? Which gives you more trust and credibility to know that if someone has credibility in the social environment nowadays, it's more valuable than anything else that you can ever imagine, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I think to add to that too, in my time here at irlabs, one thing that I've really appreciated before I joined and while I'm here is the transparency of our leaders, like Alyssa and Caroline. They have always been very active on social media. And now being able to, as the director of marketing and comms, extend that to, we have so many bright individuals who are very passionate about what we do and how we serve our clients. And being able to, have everybody represented and, speaking on the areas that they represent. Like that's one thing that I've seen at the brand level that I've really enjoyed, and I've seen audience members really resonate with that. I think the other element that you just touched on too around familiarity, it really does play into, it's like the meet the team element, right? Where, roll call, like, everybody who's on the team, the experts, and it does build up that familiarity.
Yeah.
One thing that I've really enjoyed with irlabs is the element of, everybody's there to do the work. Everybody works incredibly hard. There's always, commitment to that research element and the human elements, and even just the video work that we've been doing behind the scenes with clients or internally amongst our team members. It's just the engagement around that has been incredible, and the reception of that has been incredible. Like video is a wonderful way of doing that, where, to your point, it's the familiarity, it's being able to almost build the story. It's it's kind of the way that we resonate with television sometimes. We're seeing the familiar characters in their storylines week to week. We're not exactly running a TV show, but, you can recognize us, you can see us, you can see our commitment to what we're doing, and it's just such a wonderful thing. Really enjoyed it.
Well, I think, you touched on many great things. I was going to touch on video and your perspective on why you think video has become such an important factor or such an important part of our lives these days, and has impacted a lot of companies in growing using video to do so, to tell their story. I was having a conversation with somebody a while ago, and we're talking about the narrative, your company's narrative, and what the world knows about you. And I told them, I said, essentially you have to look at it this way. We live in a time which allows us to have our own network of broadcasting our information to many different angles, from podcast to small little stories about our team, to our customers' testimonials, to vendors and doing cross-marketing strategies, to making a story about our brand. All these are a lot more than what we used to look at when it was a 30-second commercial on TV. So that has changed the world, or our world as a corporation or as a company, whether you're small, company starting off, you can tell the same story, or whether you've been in business for 20, 30, 40 years, you can still, refresh people's, information about who you are and where you're from. So I think telling a story in the narrative is huge. When you said we're not a TV show, essentially I think you're more beyond a TV show. A TV show only provides you one episode or one type of content in a way with what goes on based on what comes to them. You now have your own television network, or your own media network, where you can broadcast everything about you and you tell the narrative to the world of who you are. Because, and going back to my other point, what I was telling that gentleman is that if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to tell your story to the world. Definitely. So who do you want to tell the story? Is it you, or you want someone else to come in and say, so they came into your company, they saw how it is, and they go out and start making a video and saying, this company has this and this and this. And meanwhile, they may not know all the facts and information. And it could be misleading, or it could be missing some information. Not necessarily because people are trying to take you down, but more importantly, that's all they get. It's not clarified. Whereas because you live and breathe the brand and the communication, and you see the people and you know how they are, you can tell their story in a way where it's true to the point where somebody looks at it, it's like, yes, I've been in their business. It is consistent with what they're talking about in this video. When I go in there, I have the same feeling and same emotional attachment to the company as they've created for me in this film. So it's so much power that's involved around video that I think a lot of people don't realize and may not take advantage of. That we have so much, and the fact that the majority of these platforms are free. And if they're not free, they're super cheap compared to how much it used to cost to get a television ad,
Yeah.
going through many different broadcast levels of communication. When we talked about clients and how you come in and you communicate with the internal team and the external clients, and we talked about where you start within that journey and how you jump into that. How do you find that when they go through this funnel of communications that you kind of guide them through? Is there any areas of challenge where you have to help the client understand a certain way where you feel like, well, I'm trying to help you understand this to better help you, but they somehow keep coming back and saying this is the direction we want to go? Is there any challenges that you come across? I guess that's where my question would be.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think a lot of it is, and this kind of extends beyond like client, like, any organization I've served. There is an element of education. Like, we are all experts in our own respective areas, and our goal is to be that expert and bring that forward in a way that helps everyone around us. And I know that applies probably in comms and outside of comms as well. I would say a lot of it is listening. Like, from the communicator perspective, we're brought in to listen and, what is that vision? What is the objective? What is the end goal? What would define this as successful at the end? Does this end? Does this just keep going and evolving iteratively? It can really vary based on, organizations or clients that I've served. I'd say a lot of it often comes down to being that educator. Like, there's a lot of different organizations that I've served where there's varying knowledge of different areas, or, this is what we want to build revenue. We want to show a refreshed brand, understanding that we now need to appeal to, further generations than we have in past, or digital transformation is such a very big topic. How do we match that? How do we compete with that? And so a lot of it is, being there as the advisor to be like, hey, I'm listening to what you're saying and I'm hearing you on what you're looking for. Here are the methods you could employ. Here are some of the stories that we could tell around that. Here's, different technology and platforms. There's AR, there's AI, there's so many opportunities. It's a great time to be alive.
It is, yeah.
There's so many things to choose now, and different ways to tell the story. But yeah, I would say it's not necessarily, getting it or not getting it. I think it's just finding that balance, because at the end of the day, a successful strategy is going to work for that organization and, the communications team that's at the table, finding that balance that, this is workable, this is sustainable, hits all of our vision, objectives, end game goals. And yeah, just kind of going from there, I would say.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sure companies or organizations that work with your company, their goal is to come to you for solutions. They rely on your expertise to take them to the next level. That's probably one of the main reasons why they would want to communicate with you. Whenever somebody comes to us or a client is interested in working with us, they're not coming in to have a fight with us about what they should or shouldn't do. We're all working towards the same goal. I mean, I always tell my clients that my goal is to make sure that we create content that helps you elevate your expertise or your story, so you can grow and increase your revenue stream, which in turn will allow me to continue being, a part of your business and helping you grow further, which keeps all of us in business, essentially. My goal isn't to make you one-off story, a one-off video for you to then go and hope that will, do great for you and you never talk to me again. We don't live in a world like that. We don't live on just one content, one piece of marketing, per year and say, hopefully people will just remember us from that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's funny you say that too, because I was giving a talk last week, and there was a question that came that is very similar to what you're saying. And I just remember my answer to it was essentially, we can create a beautiful video, or I can write you an incredible speech that will be so memorable. I can do so much. I can get you that beautiful written memo for your stakeholders, but at the end of the day, there needs to be a strong strategy underneath it. Otherwise, it is a one and done.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a strong strategy will often have that iterative evolution to it, where, it's kind of to something you were saying earlier in the session, it's got to have that ongoing familiarity, that TV show element to it that really pulls in, and even behind the scenes elements to that as well.
Absolutely.
Have such a huge impact, because it's the behind the scenes, it's the transparent, it's the human, right?
Yeah.
I say that like that wasn't true. It was.
We're all robots.
Yeah.
That's true. And it makes sense, actually, what you touched on, the fact that the strategy is pretty much the wireframe, or the building blocks of what will go from there. Every film that I work on, every story that I create, or every project that I take on, I say, well, we have to take this on with strategy. And they say, well, can't you just make this video for me and just give me a price quote and let's just shoot it next, in a couple of days? I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Because, well, how long do you want it to be? Oh, just like 60 seconds. That should be pretty simple and forward. And I'm like, that's a lot of information for us to fit in 60 seconds, where, yes, you can just turn it on and talk for 60 seconds nonstop, but have you achieved your goals? Did your audience hear you out, or did they just listen to you blabber for 60 seconds nonstop about all the values of your company? Meanwhile, they didn't have time to take that in, understand it, calculate it in their mind, and relate it to what their needs are, and say, yes, I need this company because he said something that I need, or she said something that will help me grow.
Yeah.
It's more like, oh, great, you do all these great things. I just don't know how it can work for my company. Maybe I should just not use somebody else.
Yeah.
That's all it comes down to. A product can only go so far, with the benefits, when you can't relate it to the values that it provides for the person who's actually taking it on.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree on that. I think it kind of has me think, actually, to a lot of organizations that I've either followed very closely, worked with, whole mix. I noticed that there's often this, I think maybe it's the era we're in, there's so many options, technology is booming. I've noticed that there is an urge to do what that person is doing. Do what they're doing. This looked cool, therefore we should do it.
Yeah.
That looked trendy, let's be trendy. And I totally follow that. I love that energy, because that energy indicates to me, let's move, like let's evolve.
Yeah.
And so it's a great place to start. But what I do find in those situations through the years in various areas, it's like having to be the advisor in that moment and be like, okay, let's take the principles of that, but like, is that going to work for our audience? Sometimes it can, but there's also been examples where I'm like, no, that is not our demographic. That is not going to cross over as well or have the results that you expect. So I think in that moment, it's like, okay, how can you clearly want that result. You want trendy. Let's find what trendy is for you, and what that looks like, because it's very clear for any of us as viewers or consumers to see a brand and it's like, oh, that did not quite hit. that was not quite the fit. It's almost like a sweater that's too tight, where you're like, maybe you could we could try a different one. How about this sweater?
So what you're saying is a law firm can't just do a TikTok dance sequence, to fit into the demographic that doesn't relate to them or will never buy.
Yeah, I feel
services.
like if the data's there, but it's kind of like that, where it's like, I think there's often an urge to immediately jump to a trend or a medium that has been increasingly popular, but it's often the question of, will this achieve long-term results, and will this be sustainable? And that's something that I've often advised organizations on through the years in different. I feel like early on it was like, do we get a Facebook? And now it's like, do we get a TikTok? Do we implement an AR strategy? Is that viable? How does that work? And so it's funny how it all changes through the years.
Absolutely. And it makes a huge impact in terms of knowing what you're creating now, what's going to come next from this.
Oh, yeah.
So everything that you do in your communication, we need to be clear in terms of, well, just because it worked for that company, it doesn't mean that it's going to work for yours, like you mentioned. More importantly, it could take you down the wrong path that you didn't expect to go.
Yeah.
You might attract customers you didn't really want to attract to your business, or get the attention that you didn't really think that you would get. That's one of the reasons when I communicate with my clients, I say, well, give me some samples of videos that you think you would want to have. It allows me to see the quality of visuals that they're looking at,
Yeah.
what they're thinking that they would want, and I'll know, well, can I do better for them? Can I, create something that they would enjoy watching?
Yeah.
In addition to that, I also want to see what is it that they're trying to achieve from this. And when they give that to me, I say, well, this is all great that your competitors have done it or somebody else across the world has done it.
Yeah.
Let's take all this positive energy that you've kind of have used to bring into your company.
Yeah.
Let's now break it down into, okay, what products does this video relate to? What services does it relate to?
Yeah.
That we can then create pieces of visual content that can resonate with your audience, and specifically with your target audience. And how can we then use this to then repurpose it for different mediums online and on socials to make sure that it goes further? Because one video can be broken into multiple pieces of communication and cut up into different ways and be broadcasted to the world in different ways.
Yeah.
So all those elements have to be strategized. You can't just go ahead and shoot, and then after the video is done, it's like, oh yeah, I have another idea. We can do this, and we can do this. And it's like, well, did you not think of this before? Isn't that part of your job? Don't you do this all the time? So
Yeah.
I think we as a strategists in a way, we have to anticipate where is this going to go next.
Yeah.
When we have to look, you almost have to time travel into the
Oh, yeah.
future. And go and look at this in a few months' time and say, okay, well, this is all done. What is the results of all this?
Yeah.
Obviously, the main focus and main resolution or main result that we're looking for, the client's looking for, is to bring in clients or business to their door. That's the main purpose of it. In that case, you do what you do best as a company, and you sell your product or service. Thank you for bringing us on. Now let us take it on from here and help you get to that next level, which you obviously don't have time for, because you're so busy doing what you have to be doing, what you really need to do for your business.
Yeah.
I think that is a huge factor, whether you have a communication team within your organization that's leading this and really, spearheading this whole project, or you're bringing an external team that's looking at it and saying, well, we see this from an outsider, and this is what we can help you and grow with. And I think that is a huge factor, and that's a conversation that has to be had at the beginning,
Yeah.
not
Definitely.
later on when they're invested into it. And it's like, but wait a minute, I thought it was going to be easy. It's like, we never said it's going to be easy.
I feel like there's always but wait a minute, like there's more, and you're like, I feel like that
Infomercial?
happens a lot. Yeah.
But wait, there's one more.
Yeah. Or one more thing. Do you think? Oh, I know we're 98% through this video. Do you think we could add? And it's like there's always some kind of surprise. But to your point earlier of like time traveling forward and understanding what's coming, like you're totally right. Like a huge element of where we saw that a lot. And I actually gave a talk on. I was talking to. Oh my goodness! It was a talk for. IABC, so the International Association of Business Communicators. And I was giving a talk on, is augmented reality the future of communications? And the goal of the talk wasn't, we should all run away from this and build augmented reality plans for our companies, but it was really that let's collect some data, assess, would this work? It's not about we should do this, it's what if we did? And I think a lot of what we saw of data in the late 2000s with Facebook, there was, there'd be data comparisons and it'd be like the product on Facebook with an image versus traditional media. So like what you were saying, a commercial or like a newspaper ad or something like that. Yeah. 94% conversion rate with Facebook, like knocked it out of the water. It was just incredibly successful. But even still, the communications and marketing space was like, do we need this? Is this a fad? Will this be gone in 6 months? Should we really be investing in this? And it's interesting because Shopify, I think Deloitte as well, they're showing similar data now with augmented reality that is comparable to what we saw with Facebook in the late 2000s. Wow. So it's not necessarily, oh my gosh, everybody run home and build an AR strategy. It's going to work differently for different folks, but it's the big thing back then was it was super clear which organizations jumped on, saw the innovation, saw the opportunity, jumped on, did it, versus those who waited a couple years cautiously and then had to catch up. Catch up. And it's very obvious who was on what side there. Yeah. So with my talk last week, it wasn't necessarily everybody run, panic, be afraid of things. But it was more so just, think about it. Be proactive, make an informed decision. Is this right? Is it not? And I think with AR in particular, a lot of us think, oh, it's this big, fancy, high quality, millions of dollars kind of project. And for, big Fortune 500s, that might be the case. But there's also a lot of applications of AR that are a little bit smaller. And it's a whole new space. And it's, the predictions are saying it'll boom. We'll see as we go. But even AI, it's like there's so much opportunity and innovation there.
Well, I think evolution kicks in at some point, where just like Facebook, it began as Facebook. I remember I was using MySpace back then. I thought it was the coolest thing. I had this music track that when somebody visited my page, it would play a song that I wanted them to listen to.
Oh, memory lane.
Visual appeal, which was really nice. Facebook came in and it was just a raw, basic, but it grew and grew and grew and evolved. Yeah. And like you said, people weren't sure exactly where this is going to go. Is it going to be something that could be utilized to grow businesses and companies? And it evolved into Instagram, or obviously it acquired Instagram, but it evolved into the next level, which was more image-based and less words.
Exactly.
And now right now, for example, video is, in some researches, 84% of, attention or engagement that happens is video has a huge influence versus photos or, for example, blogs or any written content. So it is constantly growing. We're all constantly evolving into it. And I see AR evolving as we grow, because obviously the goal is to not just cater to the larger corporations who have money, but also cater to small businesses, or medium to small businesses who can really utilize this service and grow. And I think those are the communities that really help it grow further. I find that bigger corporations who have large investments behind it really make the initial investment or the early adopters of this, because they have funds to test and experiment with it. And once they show approval ratings and they show that it works, everybody else takes on. One great example is Apple. I think if you remember the Apple days when they used to do keynotes, Steve Jobs would go up on stage and they would do their talk and go through the process, and it was great. Every year you would kind of wait for that. But then you get these days where, since COVID happened, they started doing more visuals. They started to do it out of their head office, at Infinity Loop, which they have this amazing production quality that even myself and my other filmmakers, we sit down and say, we analyze it, like, how did they get through the floors and get through the windows so seamlessly? And we know for a fact that is a huge production. It is essentially, I would say more like a Hollywood production quality of what they've accomplished, where they're taking you through journeys and taking you through different levels of their company, of the people, and showing different areas. And there's so many different CGIs, I'm sure, built into this thing where they showcase. It's not a simple, getting a camera and walking around with a gimbal anymore. They've taken that further. So what that causes is other companies and production companies like mine to say, well, how can we create this for our clients who are not Apple, but who are somewhere that aspire to grow and create their company to become huge, to a certain level of, happiness for them, essentially. How can we do this? And what are some of the tips and tricks that we can learn from this production? So most of the time I'm sitting there and I'm watching. I used to work for Apple, so I value what they provide in quality of content and how they communicate and all the products. But I also sit down and watch the production quality from a filmmaker's perspective. It's like, oh, that was cool. I like how they did that. How can I use that and apply that in my world? So the bigger companies, I find, start something, and the rest of us end up taking this and growing it further and applying it to every day and making it simple and easy and accessible to the more average or the more masses in a way. And I think that's a huge factor.
Definitely. And I think an element too, and I've gotten that question so much over the years, is, a CEO sees this video and they're like, oh my goodness, like, kind of what I was saying before, replicate, or, build it like this. Like, we want it to look like this. And it's, this big luxurious viewing experience. And I have often advised people in different spaces, it's great to have, but it's not always a must-have. It can be, or that can be the end goal. But like I've also seen I've worked on projects where it's like the high-end viewing experience from a video perspective. But I've also seen people, like a CEO, film a behind-the-scenes video on their iPhone and be like, hey, I'm at this conference. This was a key takeaway that I just had, having a great time. Really excited. We'll have an update for you next week about X. Just very excited. And it's so toned down. Half the time there isn't even like a audio enhanced, it's just as it is.
Yeah.
But often it's, to our earlier point, it's that transparency, that humanity. People want to see the faces. They want to see what's going on behind the scenes, and it adds to that transparency. Yeah. So I would say, like, if you were to ask me, like, iPhone video or a high-end experience, I think there's a beautiful, like, both can achieve what you're looking for. And that's the beautiful thing about where we're at in technology is you can go for the high end and it's going to look amazing. And you can also go for something more approachable and still get a similar result. Like,
Absolutely.
It's quite interesting. And I think, like, Humans of New York, social media channel that's been in existence for quite a few years, they have a great job of really nailing down that behind the scenes. They make you feel things in 600 characters sometimes, and just being able to showcase different people, it still does so well from an engagement perspective. That people element is really there.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. We can go on all day talking about this because I find it very intriguing and very interesting, this conversation, because we're touching on so many valuable elements that is required and that companies can learn from this conversation and from you in terms of what to look for, and what to keep an eye out for, and what to use and utilize in their organization. One last question essentially would be is, where do you see the future of our technology going, and how do you think a company like a smaller company that's growing, what are some of the things that they can do in order for them to place themselves in everyone else's league and grow with them?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it depends on the audience as well. Like a lot of organizations that I've spoken to in recent years, it's actually been about catering to Generation Z. There's not much data around Generation Z. They're often compared to millennials, but there's actually quite a few distinct differences. Okay. So paying attention to your business model, how it relates to audience needs, is Generation Z part of your demographics, or will they be? Or is your communication strategy holding the pieces that will attract Gen Z? And I've seen a lot of particularly 2 or 3 years ago in working in finance and banking tech, that Gen Z is a huge component of that. And it's going to be a make or break for a lot of businesses considering Gen Z. They're often very overlooked in terms of, what can an organization do to kind of get in the field and get in amongst other organizations. I would say leverage networks. So, if an organization's starting out, leverage your network, because that will be a huge component potentially of your social strategy. I would say, kind of to what we touched on earlier, that behind the scenes human element, things don't need to be absolutely perfect and polished. If you've got your key messages, you've got your vision, you've got your, behind the scenes, the story, how did we get here? How did we start? All of those things are aligned and cemented. You're already a step ahead of many organizations. So at that point, it just becomes, what are the channels that we want to tell this through? Is this news releases? Email campaigns? Are we looking to build a database for email comms? Social media? Is Facebook going to do it? Is LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok? Like you said, like not everyone. That's the one thing I feel like I've said like 5 times already this year. Not every organizations can do TikTok. They do not need TikTok necessarily, and I would advise anyone to look into your audience and what they might need before committing to a platform.
Yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of how I would answer that.
That's awesome. That's golden information. That's you've actually in today's episode you've kind of given us a wealth of knowledge in communication, and really it is so valuable, so important for us to know our communication before we start taking on projects or before start taking our marketing and sharing it with the world. Because if you don't communicate your story clearly to your audience, you may not be attracting what you really are looking for. And time and money will be wasted throughout the process and all that energy. And essentially, it will then deter you from even going further and doing any more. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, and letting our audience gain so much knowledge from this conversation. So thank you again for joining us and for being a part of our program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us here at Becoming the Brand. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you next time.